Yo, yo. All right, we are live. What up, Fred? How's it going? Where are you?
Good morning from the land of enchantment.
What is the land of enchantment?
It's New Mexico,
Without revealing too much of your identity.
also known as the land featured in Oppenheimer.
Featured in Oppenheimer. Well, so you're in Washington, D.C.? Cool. Cool. Love Washington, D.C. Or Pasadena, actually. Don't forget.
Which part is in Pasadena? Oh,
He's teaching. Because
that
he
all
got it.
was that was all UCLA. That wasn't Berkeley.
No, he doesn't. He never taught at UCLA. He was at Caltech. He
Caltech.
was at
Sorry.
UC Berkeley and Caltech. So
Well, I'm still brushing up on my history. Meanwhile, and I think it's in the other room.
Wernicke.
My dad has a photo of the Trinity bomb kind of on the
Oh,
bookshelf in
really?
the other room. Yeah, that was pretty cool.
That's the first bomb, but I guess Bikini Atoll, is that the first? That's the first uh uh hydrogen bomb? Is
I
that
think
right?
I think something in the Pacific. I wasn't sure if that was the first, but um yeah, lots of bombs. um but yeah, no, I mean it's I'm in Santa Fe, just south of kind of the town. Sounds like it was built by Oppenheimer and his dream that would soon turn into a global nightmare.
Well, I mean, we didn't get to much time, and you haven't seen Barbie yet.
I haven't,
But
but I mean,
this is
I think
the other side of the coin of the Oppenheimer universe. It's funny because Oppenheimer pissed off the Indians, as far as I understand, via an article. So the well,
how did it piss up? You mean the
the
country of
two
India?
Indians, actually, the Native Americans, of course, which
Right.
we've seen some Twitter chatter about, they were not featured as have being displaced, which is fair. Although I have to say that it kind of, if you feature them, then that invites a whole nother story which distracts from the main story.
It's another movie. I mean, and I don't think they
Yeah,
did justice by it, but and I'm not even going to say they did enough because nothing's ever enough, but they
right,
did
exactly.
acknowledge it. Like
They did acknowledge it was mentioned.
that I think, given the question,
Right,
what should we do with the Los Alamos land? His first reaction to
right,
President Truman was give it back to the Indians. I don't know if that suddenly makes him heroic. I'm just saying, I think they
right.
at least acknowledged it. I don't even think the movie treats him as a hero. I think like that's sort of what I love
No, I
about
don't think
Nolan.
so either.
Nolan
Although
is
people do tortured genius, genius has hero connotations in some
there's some
cases, I
there's
guess.
something sympathetic about that, but I mean, I don't know. I think I love that Nolan sort of has kind of stuck to these like, anti-hero roots on a lot of
Right,
his storytelling, that like you don't sort of whitewash characters through their character of just always being right or something. Like they're
right,
often always wrong. I don't
right,
think like Christian Bale's Batman is particularly likable. He's badass, but
right. Well, I mean, it's funny because it's like the quote, the famous quote is um what is it? Uh Become, what is it, the stay a hero, what's that quote? Stay a hero long enough to see yourself a villain or whatever.
hmm.
You know what I'm talking about, right?
It sounds familiar. I can't say I've dropped it the way you're trying to now to know where it fits into a cliche drop.
You either
But
die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
oh,
It's the classic. You don't know that?
I mean, I've heard it. I just haven't used it. So thank you
Uh,
for
it's
bumping it up to the top
I
of my
feel like
inbox.
it's in the ethos. And if in fact I feel like it's maybe the most quotable, most remembered quote from all of Nolan's work.
Hmm.
Um
Oh,
so
is it his quote, or who says that?
that's in The Dark Knight.
Oh,
You,
okay. Who
you
says
either
it?
die a hero long enough to see yourself become, either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become a hero. Um who says that?
From
I
whose
think
mouth?
Harvey says that, which is ironic because that is what happens to him, right? Of course.
Harvey? Sorry, I'm blanking on all this stuff. It's
Harvey
early.
Dent is Two-Face.
Oh, sorry. Okay, that's right. The
Yeah.
Aaron.
Um, but yeah,
What's the
anyway,
name?
so he So I think it's interesting that that is a big, and maybe that's a through line across, Nolan's work to a certain respect, right? I mean, Interstellar is almost the opposite in a way, but here we have this guy who in the beginning is a great scientist and a communist, right? Which from some perspectives is like he has a kind of noble reason to be a communist, right? He wants to help people, blah blah blah. And then, of course, by the end of it, he's dropping a bomb on, or he's a part of dropping a bomb on the Japanese. Anyway, this detracts from what the point I was making, that they also pissed off the Indians, because I saw an article. So the Indians on one side of displacement, and then the American Indians / Native Americans, and then on the other side is Indian Indians, who apparently are up in arms about the Bhagavad Gita being recited during a sex scene. There's a holy text being recited during a sex scene. So she is naked, his mistress naked, mounts him and gets him to read, spoilers, gets him to read his famous quote, "I am, become whatever death or
But is that some kind of blaspheme? Like it isn't, is it? Like,
I mean,
I'm just walking all over a
any
minefield on this.
any holy text can be blasphemous in a context, right? So
I guess so. Okay. All right. I apologize if I've inherently insulted anyone.
I mean, I hope not, but yeah. So I think
Aaron Eckhart, that's who I was chasing. Aaron, that's the actor that said that line, I guess.
Which line?
The line you said, the Harvey Dent character.
Oh, Harvey Dent.
Yeah.
I mean, Harvey Dent starts out as a hero, white knight, right? To the Dark Knight, and then he ends up becoming Two-Face, who is one of the most famous supervillains of the Batman canon. So, and he's literally Two-Face, which is perfect because that line is so great. But anyway, Barbie.
I've heard of that movie.
So it's funny to me that Oppenheimer is pissing off people in certain ways. Like, it's not, maybe in some cases, some would argue it's not woke enough, and it's.
Well, I mean, let's start with the fact that
romanticizing and dramatizing genius, and then here's Oppenheimer. Or sorry, here's Barbie, who's pissing off the conservatives. Ben Shapiro is burning buying $100 worth of Barbies to burn, and at the same time, there's an article this morning that says that Chinese patriarchy is annoyed because the Chinese feminists are loving the film, which I thought was hilarious.
I mean, we're definitely in the age of outrage as a currency of communication. So it almost, I think when I first saw that article that there was a huge conservative backlash to Barbie, I guess I couldn't have, when I think about it, it's why are we surprised? Like, clearly the movie is trying to, add color to the rainbow, so to speak, of that brand. But I did sort of feel sort of a similar disappointment in the state of culture that I'm like, wow, I did allow myself to have that feeling that last weekend of like, wow, this is like this cool thing that everybody's like excited about movies again. And there's just this like playful buzz, people dress up to see movies. Like, it just seemed like, this experience that was, in terms of its net effect, seemed to be just people came together in a way that's kind of what movies used to do. And then just like it lasted barely, a weekend, that somebody had to either use this sort of big loud moment as a way to sort of engagement farm and sort of like, look me, I got something provocative to say about the big loud things, so that it's the top of everybody's hashtags and stuff. But it also just reminded me of like early on in Trump's presidency, when he just went after the NFL, and it was just like, I remember just like things already felt really divided at the beginning of his presidency before things even got more surreal. But like, just like, I was like, can you just give us Sunday? Can Sunday be a day that like we could all just like enjoy watching football? And instead he made it so that no, when you're watching that football game, you're either on the right side of history or not. Like is just like, God, like, and it just feels like a tactic, like just to make noise and stay in the front of the news feed. I mean, maybe there's some earnest, real ideological debate happening, but it doesn't, I'm sure there's other movies that have come out that, didn't strike the right chord with Ben Shapiro. But like, I guess like my curiosity with this story is, this year, I think the whole Bud Light controversy that sort of was sparked with the Dylan Mulvaney and I guess the trans influencer that at the time someone at Bud Light thought it was incumbent upon their kind of, American apple pie brand to sort of start acknowledging diversity. I think is probably the shorthand for what that marketing department thought they were doing by engaging a trans influencer to promote a beer. And that was this huge, ugly.
A beer, by the way, that is beloved in mainly, states that are more right leaning, right?
Sure, I'm just saying, like, that's why I say American apple pie. Like, it's this sort of like just
Totally.
middle of the road thing. And Miller did the same thing, except it sounds like Bud Light got skewered harder. Like Miller Lite got the Alana Glazer from Broad City to do this big commercial about how beer
Right.
commercials have been too sort of chauvinistic and male. I don't know if you saw that that thing she did. It was the same moment. Like, you could tell that there was like dueling marketing departments at beer companies that thought someone had to run towards like the pride crowd and the sort of the feminism crowd for their products. And they probably thought it was a good idea. And they probably thought it was like, this is a way to expand our brand and how to get more people in our tent. And including the effect this had on Target, which is all sort of seemed to be this like coordinated attack, I would argue, in terms of why this all of a sudden became a news item. I'm curious. I genuinely hope they've sort of built a sort of a fortress of sort of just good vibes and support, which seems to be the
I
true
think they have.
experience. But like,
I wish you'd watch it. I wish you had watched it.
No, I'm going to see it. I'm just saying I can see
Yeah.
what's happening. Like, that it's this positive movie that really used storytelling and characters and brands to sort of invite a broader discussion about a lot of things. I'm curious, do the Ben Shapiro's in the world just like not let the bone go and turn this into the next Target? That like, well, we can't let people love things that we don't like.
Well, I mean, there's a few things that are operative to me from the perspective of a conservative like Ben Shapiro, who himself is an influencer, right? Who also adheres to all the mechanics of an influencer, which is to commentate on big topics that to make themselves feel more important and all that. But like, I think like he has to respond in a way from his perspective, because it is such a big brand. It's such a big news story that it's like, of course, everybody's going to talk about it. So here, this is my take now. And if Ted Cruz is talking about it, then I got to, whatever. And and then for some reason, I think in general, Hollywood, I think from the perspective of conservatives, has become the vanguard of the woke or the liberal media, I think, right? I think the liberal media includes CNN as well as Hollywood. And so here's another Hollywood thing. And thank God we have Sound of Freedom. But Barbie is like the vanguard, and here it's putting women at the center, and we've got this huge abortion debate. And so, of course, I'm going to skewer Barbie because Barbie is a film that, centers women in the story as it should. Barbie is a girl, woman, female brand. I don't, it's funny to me that anybody's protesting that at all. It's just like,
well, it's interesting. It's interesting because you can see that, like, I mean, when I just even heard of the notion of a Barbie film, like, as a parent, that I've thus far gone out of my way to not buy Barbies because I think there's sort of like a basic like body image and sort of beauty convention perception that I'm just like, I don't know. I think I have better things to do to indoctrinate into my daughters. It's I love Moana as sort of like an alternative female protagonist in content. So I think that I think the Barbie marketing team knew that there was sort of like a dated perception of femininity or perception of girl power, or whichever way to frame it, that they said
at the same time,
but they said, let's rip open our vest and take all the arrows and acknowledge all this stuff and make a movie about that. At least that's all the commentary I've heard, is that they very smartly, by choosing Greta Gerwig, who's the opposite of a jingoistic filmmaker, like she's someone who does a lot more nuanced and sort of progressive female empowerment stories. So look, in some ways they were in that meme of like, hey, big brands need to recognize that there's a different sort of narrative for a part of America that, I would like to think is the arc of justice bending part of America, that is the better version of a generation than the one before it. But
Right.
we're in the middle of a stage of America where these things are tools for social media campaigns to, gin up support and sometimes political support and foundation, funding. Um, we're in a moment where that instinct has now been thrust into a conservative America that sees all of these moments as ways to sort of stay at the top of people's, social media feeds, to just make noise and create division. I'm not even sure they truly care about what they're arguing about. They just know that it's useful to make noise. It's easy to go
Right.
after
I mean, it
a
gets
beer
views.
commercial. Yeah.
It
Right.
gets views, right?
So I guess I'm just curious, like this sort of Target, Miller Lite, Bud Light moment that happened earlier this year, which and it's obviously very specifically targeting trans community. One of my sort of uglier observations is like, I feel like the abortion debate was a very valuable political tool wherever people land on the issue in terms of what it did for fundraising, what it did for candidate building for a Republican Party. And arguably they won. They got what they spent decades fighting for, in terms of reversing a major Supreme Court decision. So again, it's probably obvious where I land on the issues. I'm just sort of acknowledging these things as tactics. And to me, I noticed just the same energy of sort of like divisive black and white, only one way or the other thinking emerging in terms of this anti-trans movement early this year. Again, a whole other conversation about how much communities deserve attention and support and all that stuff. I'm just talking about the political tactics here. And to me, I'm curious, does that sort of movement see the opportunity of it's funny, like at first everybody loved qualifying it as like, wow, that's the biggest opening weekend for a female filmmaker, a female comedy. And like a few people on social media are like, guys, screw you. This is the biggest opening for a comedy ever, period. Has nothing to do with it being a woman. Like, so I'm saying like, there's been enough pushback that it's like, call it the success that it is. It's just a big, giant success that is also a woman. So that has happened, that this big, giant, successful thing has happened, that then really becomes squarely the opus of a female filmmaker taking on some big, what people want to, sort of put in a box as woke issues. Now what? Do people just let that slide and go back to their, sort of, movies that they'd rather watch, or do they keep the bone and make noise on an issue that resonates? Hey, Lauren.
Hey, Lauren. Oh, she isn't here yet. Still connecting.
She's connecting audio.
Yeah, I mean, I do wonder about that. I mean, I appreciate that it's like that. Like, I could care less about all these qualifiers. Like, I'm happy either way. It's like, it's a good big comedy. It's a big movie by a big director. Like, cool. Hi, Lauren. You're live. We're live. Can you hear us?
You're muted.
You're muted though, so we can't hear you.
Hi.
There we are. We're kind of closing off our conversation about Barbie. I don't know if did you see it?
No.
No. Okay. Will you see it? The way you said no sounds like you might not.
I have like a long-term childhood prejudice against Barbie from being handed too many of them in my childhood, and I kind of hated dolls, hated Barbie. But I hear it's very good, and it's a good deconstruction of the whole thing. So, yeah, I'll probably see it.
Well, I mean, it's funny because I think I've seen it. Fred hasn't seen it. I think the film is aware of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the film is aware that it's a hated brand as well as it's a beloved brand, as well as that it's a big brand.
Yeah.
As well. And it's interesting because it's also like the body shape that we jumped right before you got on, we were talking about like body shape, and like it is addressed in the film, and it's aware of that, but it also chose one of the hottest like women in Hollywood to be this, or at least she chose herself, or she chose the brand, to be the star. So I kind of thought that was kind of interesting. I don't know. I can't wait for you guys to see it and we can actually talk about it. But I also, we started the conversation because I think it's funny that the conservatives hate it, and so do male Chinese hate it, which I love because that's the article I want to see the New York Times write is, hey, look, Republicans and Chinese communists hate Barbie.
Why? Why?
What's that?
Why do they hate it? Why do the male Chinese hate it?
It's patriarchy.
Oh.
Patriarchy. Duh. Of
Well,
course.
by the way,
Of course
Elon, they can join Elon Musk in that sort of global hate fest because
Exactly.
that was his tweet.
Did
That
he hate on it also?
he hates, he trolls anything that's successful because it helps keep him in the
Right.
discussion. I mean, him and Trump are cut from the same cloth. But yeah, his tweet was like it's like if there was a drinking game for the word patriarchy in that movie, and like you'd be floored by like Act 2 or something.
Well,
So,
Barbie
that's
versus
Elon
the
for you.
patriarchy. That's interesting.
but
Have you
what what
guys
we
seen Oppenheimer?
I mean,
Have seen
yeah.
Oppenheimer. Yeah. Have you seen Oppenheimer?
No, I haven't, but I saw that the US is restarting their nuclear weapons program, which is an article that came out the same weekend as Oppenheimer. So
Oh,
that was interesting.
really?
Yeah.
We're restarting our nuclear weapons program.
Yeah.
I thought we never stopped it.
No, we
did.
had a maintenance program. We never were building them. Are you saying that the US is building them again?
Yeah.
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
wait, where? I don't see an article.
Yeah, I'm trying to find that
Um,
article too.
doo-doo.
Yeah, I'm seeing an article from a month ago from the Biden administration saying the US will not build new nuclear weapons to counter Russia. That's a
Lauren's
month.
got fake news out there on the East Coast.
It's a month ago.
Fake news.
It says Time Magazine 2 days ago, right at the top of the Google results.
What are we Googling for?
Yeah, I see that link.
US restarting their nuclear weapons program.
What?
The thing
Inside the Los Alamos.
the detail I'm
lab?
trying to admit is because like our policy for the longest time has been maintenance, because these are bombs that are like they're 80 years old now, and so that we're
Yeah.
constantly keeping the ones that we have in shape and obviously making sure they don't break. So I'm
Oh.
curious if this rebuilding the cores is connected to sort of keeping them operational as opposed to building
Yeah.
new ones, you know.
I think we were actually reducing the amount along with Russia. We had like a pact with Russia where we
Yeah.
were both like decreasing the amount of nukes that we both had.
Yeah, so I was at the nuclear museum a few months ago and was talking to one of the curators, and he was like, well, we built up a huge amount, and then after the treaty with Russia, we reduced all the way down to 5% of our total of our peak.
Mm-hmm.
So we're way down. It's funny because Oppenheimer, I think, so spoiler a bit, sorry, Lauren, but Lewis Strauss is in historically is one of the people that takes Oppenheimer down, and he was a big proponent of, and he was ruined as a result of the events in the film, but like he was a big proponent of using nuclear for peaceful means, including like plants and stuff. So I do wonder, it makes me wonder if we had not dropped the bomb, would we be like very pro nuclear power instead? But that counterfactual doesn't exist. So that parallel universe does not exist for us. Anyway.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm reading the article. I'm reading the article here. It says the US no longer manufactures new plutonium. So I wonder, it's possible that this is another way of saying they need to respond to the fact that Russia is making noise again. But I do think there's a reasonable sort of less sort of noisy point, which is that they're ultimately maintaining the arsenal that we have, which is very old. And like you can only imagine like a Model T Ford was getting like, lined up for battle, like that's kind of what you're dealing with these things.
Yeah, but nuclear half-life is forever, right?
Huh?
Nuclear half-life lasts for so long though, right? They just have to update the machinery around the nuclear object.
It does seem like there's something new. I want to read this article. Thanks for flagging it.
Yeah, I mean,
Time Magazine.
I thought it was pretty big news because it came out alongside Oppenheimer, kind of. But I feel like a lot of people have actually missed this news, and for me, it was kind of huge. Yeah.
Inside Los Alamos. There you go.
Yeah.
Just a stone's throw.
Yeah, the
Well,
same facility that Oppenheimer worked at.
Yeah.
I put in the title Barbie, philosophy of America, and sports. Those are the topics
So where do we go
of
next?
today.
And sports,
Yeah.
I can't help you with sports. I'll go ahead and leave now.
Well, sports is interesting because of the media around it lately, but I don't want to get into that now. But I don't know, because I was like, Lauren's coming, so we got to do philosophy.
Oh God, like I can
So let's
philosophize
do.
about anything.
Well, I
I
mean,
could do sports.
but just to brief you on this, Fred and I have been doing this every other day, roughly. I've been trying to get Fred to do it more often.
We're getting there. We're pretty close.
But in the absence of Fred, also doing it with other people like yourself. And I do like a little AI experiment in the evenings sometimes with my friend Gwen. But yeah, that's kind of the vibe. I don't know where it's going. It's very experimental. We are live right now to 0 viewers probably.
Yeah. So what we're doing is
on-
we're creating the building and public narrative that someday when we're very successful, the deep cut fans will go back and watch our old pieces that and go, wow, like there's Easter eggs all over the place.
There's, oh my God. Why was he wearing a tank top? It was hot.
That was it. That was the tip of the
live?
hat. I'm actually
Where
in New
are
Mexico. I'm in Santa Fe right now. I'm visiting my parents. I'm usually
Oh God, you're right. You're in ground zero for the nuclear holocaust.
That's right. He is.
I meant
We are
like, are you
on
streaming
YouTube.
on YouTube or-
We're on YouTube live right now.
Okay.
I'm working on kind of setting up OBS, so I haven't figured that one fully out yet. It's a little cumbersome. But I would like to be streaming to multiple places at the same time. I wish, and I have been thinking, Fred, I have been thinking about, doing like 1 or 2 sessions a week, which are just Clubhouse and or Twitter Spaces. Just because there's a different audience there, different vibe.
Yeah, I think we should bounce around. I don't know. My cleanest, I know that we're going to keep punting format a little bit, and I know this is a bit of the process. My cleanest vision for this is that this is the raw footage that we're live cutting, and we're going to come up with a super tight flow for how it just quickly gets cut down into a 20-minute piece. And I think then that 20-minute piece is basically the marketing that we try to ever get like a podcast deal on or something.
And there's a thing, Lauren, that's called Opus that Fred found. It's called opus.pro. I'll drop the link in.
It's this really cool AI. I mean, it's also a sign of things to come, but it's basically you give it a YouTube link, and then it, with the mastery of its computerized brain, goes through it's kind of optimized for this type of format of like conversation, that it goes through the transcription of the conversation, kind of highlights the most kind of sticky moments, and then instantly chops a social video, running time, subtitles, gives it like, it just gives you your marketing bits. It like chops up like the raw footage. So that's almost like the micro version of what I even think we need for like, what's the 15-minute show? That's like the more polished thing. But even that should take like a day to edit. Like it shouldn't be like some big long thing.
Okay.
I just think there's so much fluff in our conversation. If we chop down most of the fluff, we'd probably be down to about 15, 20 minutes.
True. Well, I think based on what I've done with conversations like this in the past, I think there's a lot less fluff when you have a designated topic and you have somebody who works to keep on topic with that. And you've done a bit of research in the past too, so you kind of come prepared with information or questions to generate the discussion. Otherwise, it can lead towards fluff, but that's the way I've found best to cut out that. Also, if it is philosophy related and you guys don't mind, I could share the link in my server and we would get some viewers who might share it with other people.
Nice. Yeah,
that would work.
Down to play around. And I think I'm going to learn how to do editing on the side. On probably CapCut. But yeah, we'll see. And like, there's also Runway ML. There's so much crazy stuff happening.
Yeah, it's barely July with all this stuff. But I mean, I think right now the format that has sort of more organically played. I agree, preparation and sort of research is good. But I think in general, we sort of introduce topics, we kind of introduce our own takes, and then we kind of resolve it with like, okay, where did we land? There's at least a bit of an arc to each topic's journey. And I think even without a more kind of like taskmaster model of someone keeping us moving, which I'm not disagreeing with you, I think we kind of have the raw information that even if we were to edit what we did last week, I think we'd have pretty fun 20-minute chats or 15-minute chats.
Yeah, it really all depends on what your goal is. I mean, there are a lot of super successful podcasts out there that just have a more organic flow from one kind of conversation to the next, and it works very well.
I think we're probably closer to that spiritually. I don't know if we have.
Yeah, and I think we got to do a little more preparation and stuff. But anyway, I don't want to get bogged down. We've now talked for 5-10 minutes about that in a live, so people have that now. They can see us talking about how this is going to work.
We got to move on.
Yeah, we got to move on. We've talked about Barbie. I don't know what's top of mind philosophically. It's funny because I do wonder about what's happening to America in general. Maybe that's the topic. It's something I think about a lot, which is like, where is and maybe this pairs well with Barbie, right? Which is like, where is the consciousness of our country going? And I think something that Scott Galloway, who I follow from time to time, he said something that kind of resonated with me, which is that if he were to instate anything in America, he would institute national service, like some kind of military type service, because his idea was that there's no connective tissue in American society consciousness, and we keep getting more and more different. We have more and more different experiences, and we don't have shared experiences. But I wonder, and then I listened to him yesterday, and he was talking about Barbie specifically, and it's like, hey, here's a blockbuster moment, where everybody in the mall is getting dressed up to go see Barbie, and maybe Oppenheimer as well. Like, are films like a big connective tissue that we can have? Like, TV is less and less so, right? Because TV, it's like, yeah, I see Fred nodding off, but TV, in my opinion, might be less so because I have way more choice on TV, and it's way less likely for me to run into somebody who has watched the same TV shows. Probably because
that's a product. But that's the product of the time shifting model. I mean, I think
exactly,
but for the successions that were like weekly appointment viewing,
but again,
there was
But we've covered this. Succession is astronomically smaller than Yellowstone, right?
I just mean the model of shows.
100%.
But Yellowstone as an example, people dress up as Yellowstone characters now. Like, it works.
Sure. But I guess the point being that is film the connective tissue in American consciousness? Can it be? Or is it still, is this wishful thinking?
I think anything that has like appointment viewing as a model, which includes sports, which is obviously an institution where people show up with uniforms and cheer on things that are important to them. I think that has that power. And I think I to sort of zoom out for a second, I think I read somewhere that, I don't have the data now, but I remember this data was true. And I saw this, that like, I think the biggest box offices in the world are all in China right now, in terms of where the actual money flows, because China figured out not long ago the effect of movies as a tool for kind of domestic populations, and the kind of what movies were a bit more in the 80s and the earlier, of like how those Hollywood blockbusters were, that's where the Jerry Bruckheimer started taking meetings with the Pentagon. And that's where all these like filmmakers became very meaningful kind of voices for political figures, because they represented that ability to move millions of people towards a 2-hour, mental dump on here's what, my screenplay is about. So absolutely. And I think you're right. The time shifting environment of TV has sort of diffused that effect, but I think there's still this sort of more,
I think it's time shifting and supply,
but there's a flood. But I'm saying when a hit emerges, then that hit becomes this political power, like that's why Yellowstone, it's funny, you and I were texting yesterday about how you're so interested in behemoths in the business world. I'm very interested in hits, of like, why is something a hit? Why did something connect? So in some level, you have the interest of what did it connect with, but then when it does connect, what does TV do uniquely that movies don't do as much? Is you keep churning out the hit, you make more of it, you keep that audience sustained. So what Yellowstone, as the example we keep coming back, does do in TV, and that's where I sort of tilted my head when he said that, is it is a very powerful culture tool in terms of its continuing effect on people's hearts and minds.
Right. What do you think, Lauren?
Well, I think there are some modern examples still of shows that kind of everybody seems to have seen and connect with. Stranger Things was the first thing that jumped into my mind. And I think it was a product of Netflix being really big at the time and just something that seemed to grab everybody's attention. And that has slacked off a bit, but that came to mind. And also there's kind of a running joke among my friends that when the pandemic hit, it seemed like everybody was at home and was able to watch Tiger King on Netflix. And that became kind of a joke that, like, well, we're all tuned into this. And then when you talk about something that connects everybody, I feel like what you're kind of talking about is kind of water cooler talk at work. Like, what can I talk about that you've also seen or you've also been to, or you also watched last night? And that's part of why sports is a big example, like Fred said, because that's definitely something where people connect and they all watched at the same time, and it's something to talk about the next day at the water cooler. But when you first mentioned something that connects us and you mentioned military service, I actually would lean much more towards that as something to connect us rather than anything entertainment related, because
say it again. What would you want?
I wouldn't want military service, but I would want some kind of public volunteer service, like a mandatory year or 2 years that you had to do volunteering.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I'm on the board of this kind of like nonprofit in LA called Changeist, as I plug a little bit, but the whole mentality of it is that it's like the little leagues for civic duty. It's like trying to work with kids to start thinking about that kind of like, sort of getting involved in your communities in very tangible ways. And in some ways, it's a bit of like a starter course to get involved in AmeriCorps, which is like, once upon a time when it was a more popular institution, it was this thing like, it was literally like, well, I could go in the army or I could, go help build some houses or whatever the mission is. So it's it's interesting. So I really, I believe in that. I think that's a really important kind of social glue that bizarrely, sort of the modern American consciousness, whether it's the libertarian streak that gets louder every day, or people's just boredom because they're watching too much TV, or just the ADD culture we live in, that sort of commitment to your fellow neighbor or to your broader community doesn't seem to be a value in a way that like John F. Kennedy seemed to like make it really loud when he said, ask not what your country can do for you. But beyond like military service or these kinds of like working for the man type moments, like the AmeriCorps that somebody might say, I was really struck when I visited Rwanda. I went for my honeymoon to kind of explore a part of the world that I dream of ever going back to. I don't know if did you know this about Rwanda, that they have this national program that, and now I hope I'm not getting this wrong, I think it's once a month. I think once a month, everybody takes the weekend off, the entire country. And the local
Rwanda?
And the local community leaders designate, okay, here's what we're doing. And they're like, oh, we're going to go build a school over here, or we're going to clean up this entire neighborhood. Like, so it's just this thing that like everybody just does it. And it's not like, oh, the government's making me do it. Like, you're doing it with everybody. Like, everybody is doing it. Like, there's no like opt out. And I just remember, and if you haven't been to Rwanda, I mean, this is 2015. So I hope my sort of love for the country isn't dated. It was a fascinating place to be, at the time. First of all, it's incredible how clean it is. Like there's like having traveled to different parts of the world where the perception is that they're, underprivileged or whatever. There wasn't that part of town where all the garbage is, where everything just dumps over there. There's no plastic in the country. That's the other thing that they've outlawed in the country, that there's no plastic bags, so that there's no piles of ugly plastic bags on the side of the street. So I hope that hasn't changed. This was the effect in 2015, but that plus this idea of National Service Day, I thought was so brilliant as like this incredible like thing that everybody's like, yeah, sure, we just all have to do it. And like, what does that do to a population when you just have that built into your monthly head cycle, that I'm at least going to see everybody, we're all sort of for one weekend being selfless. And it doesn't involve war, it doesn't involve fighting people you don't want to kill, and all the things that, you know, are divisive about military service. But I don't know, I do think that's missing from sort of like the objective value of life these days.
I think I have heard of that before, because I've heard it credited as part of the reason that Rwanda was able to bounce back from their civil war and genocide in the 90s kind of really quickly, was because of things like that they instated in doing. And I also like that it sort of dissolves the difference between public and government. You know, I feel like too often we see government as a sort of separate entity, like you might look at a corporation, but when you think about it as just the public coming together and you are a part of that, because you're participating in it, it dissolves that difference and it makes you, I think it really helps people understand the government a lot more, which I feel like, especially in America, we've really lost a lot of understanding of the way our government works.
Yeah, I just posted it, the good old Wikipedia. It's called Umuganda. It's a national holiday in Rwanda taking place on the last Saturday of every month for mandatory nationwide community work from 8 to 11. And in participation in Umuganda is required by law, and failure to participate can result in a fine.
Wow.
And
Umuganda, fine. Love it.
But, you know, like I always think about like fines sound like the man. Like, what if it's like a $10 fine? Like, it's just some type of deterrent. Like, it's something that goes like, screw it, I'll do it. You know, the same way that you get a speeding ticket for driving a little too fast. Anyway, I thought that was brilliant. And I really saw that from the people. And I think that's what you're describing, Lauren, that it felt there was obviously there's a source of national pride in that. There was people that were like, yeah, like, of course we do this. Like, why wouldn't you help your fellow neighbor who needs your help? And like, what an incredible value to just actually focus the power of your government on, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And think about the power afterwards too, to look around you and see like, I helped build that school and now it's functioning and there are kids coming and going, or, you know, I helped to rebuild that person's home. I was up on that roof and they're happy and able to have a good roof now, and feeling like you're a part of the community and you're connected in that way. Yeah, that's another thing we've really lost in the US.
I mean, this is great, dude. If Biden executive ordered this, he would be the best president of all time.
And by the way, what if, you know, flip the carrot and stick upside down, turn it into a tax break, you know, like instead of being fined, like say you get a, you know, $1,000 tax break for participating this once a month, and you get your NFT that marks your behavior. This will be the way we get NFT.
I mean, it doesn't, the thing to me is it doesn't even have to be once a month. It could be like once a quarter.
I mean, start somewhere, obviously.
Start somewhere in America.
As someone who's running a little dinner club in LA, I think when we don't do it monthly, people lose the vibe. I do think there's something something about the cadence that makes it feel like it's a part of your life, you know?
It's a consistent thing.
Good point.
But so, you know, there's still some good ideas out there.
You would definitely want to use the carrot and not the stick in the US, because I feel like even suggesting the idea would have libertarians and Republicans up in arms, because they've become very ironically anti-government, and that's a strong sentiment. I mean, I even see that among a lot of my liberal friends, where they're very much like, I don't trust both sides, all politicians are corrupt and the government is corrupt, and so they've lost the ability to just see any good in it. And that would be something I would really want to see people start to change their minds about, is like, at least locally there is some good.
Well, as long as we build schools where they teach that slavery was actually a benefit to Black people, I think we could all really get behind this.
Florida.
You know, that's not a great quotable. Can you clarify your position on that?
Sure. No, that's one of the most amazing dispatches out of the great state of Florida, is that as the presidential candidate Ron DeSantis has made it part of his platform to rip open the educational standards of the public system. He's brought in a team of really big brains to change some of these core narratives. And one of them is that being a slave was actually kind of, you know, a way to learn skills, according to Ron DeSantis and his education standards team. That apparently, you know, there's a lot of bad, but there's, you know, a little bit of, you know, some things that are worth considering, I guess, is the way they continue to qualify it. But if you follow the news, like, his entire presidential campaign is built on the stance of just running towards this kind of anti-woke kind of meme, thinking that that's his like killer app for winning the presidency. And he's doubling down on it. Like, even though people are like, come on, dude, you're literally saying something that makes no sense. He has to double down on it. At least that's the way I've seen the press report it. Yeah. So I hope I don't just get clipped on the internet as being pro-slavery. Please don't do that. Please don't do that algorithm.
Yeah, see, that's the thing. You gotta be careful, man. You're a white looking man, or you are a white man, and you're saying the crazy stuff online. You never know.
Yeah,
well, you never know.
Yeah,
DeSantis is a pestilence. That's going to be quoted. I'm an Asian man calling a Republican a pestilence. Yeah. Sorry, what were you saying, Lauren?
I think that DeSantis is kind of doing what Trump did very successfully, which was have these sort of dog whistles towards more extremist groups. And I think that the slavery thing was probably more of a dog whistle towards the Southeast, who are very pro-Confederacy, who even to this day wave those flags, and which I see often in my town in North Carolina. And I think that it worked very well for Trump to kind of skirt that edge of doing these dog whistles, but not saying outright the things that a lot of his supporters do say outright.
But I think that's what I find fascinating, Lauren, is that, yeah, DeSantis is just saying it. He's just, and arguably as an executive running a government, doing it. And he's saying, look, I'm not just talking about it, I'm doing it. So he's really riding that sort of point as his political power. It's interesting to see how Trump has responded to the category of DeSantis candidates who are saying we're building our platform on being anti-woke. He's even sort of making fun of them. He's like, oh, all these guys that can't stop talking about woke. Like, he's almost like saying, like, you guys aren't playing the 4D chess I'm playing. Oh, like he's like he's frankly saying, like, and then his voters get it, that they're like, I know that he's really like super into this stuff, but he's like, I'm never going to be dumb enough to just say this out loud. But you know where I'm coming from. Like, he's just this super like mental gymnastics model of being that awful. If you're against him, I guess. If you're for him, then he's that great. It's interesting to see how, like, they're supposedly borrowing from his playbook, and he's like, you guys didn't read it. This isn't the way I do it.
Well, it's funny because I think Trump is even better at this than Elon is. Like, Elon is kind of playing the 3D chess of this kind of stuff, and Trump is kind of has figured out this meta.
But the beauty of that effect is that it goes back to my main thesis on him, is he doesn't actually care about anything or anyone.
Oh, totally.
Like, so I'm saying, like, even DeSantis is screwed in that game because he seems to really care about being anti, these sort of, emergent kind of communities in the public day. Like, he genuinely seems to. I don't think Trump actually cares about anything. And when you don't actually care about anything, you're the superpower. Like, you could basically, walk in and out of any conversation and sort of say the opposite of anything you just said and be like, you can't say that I'm for anything. It's incredible. It's like you then you just get sort of lost in, wait, what did he actually just say?
Right. Nothingness.
This is part of why I think that DeSantis is actually much more dangerous than Trump too, though, because he does care and he does have the, I think,
he has like an actual perspective.
Yeah. And I think, if I was to say that Trump cared about one thing, it would be himself, maybe his family, money. But because
you're absolutely right, Lauren. That is what all roads lead back to. Is that the answer is, how does this situation benefit me and maybe my family? Sometimes even his kids piss him off.
Yeah, I agree. It really, the use of his kids was only to benefit himself further because they were loyal, some of them. But yeah, it also explains why he was such a Democrat when he lived in New York, because that was what benefited him at the time.
Well, I think we've officially found ourselves in the Trump hole, and if I've had anything to do with that, I apologize to everyone. I'm nervous about us staying here as a conversation. Well, and that's not a comment to you, Lauren. It's a comment to myself.
It's
Well, I will
traumatic.
kind of challenge this a little bit, which is that are we a party to the thing that I started out this conversation of doing, is that we are we live in America that is a like that is trapped in the yin yang. No smirk from Lauren on the yin yang. I'm disappointed.
Well,
But like
all of reality is yin yang, and
wow, here we go. We're trapped in a black and white scenario where we cannot help but condemn Trump and DeSantis. It's very hard for, I think I remember this, watching this from Vietnam when I was living in Vietnam, and like watching as Americans would repeatedly online go, because you're this, I'll never talk to you. Or because you're this, we're not friends anymore. We've been in this trap, I feel like, for a decade plus.
I think the effect started with Clinton. I think that was the cable news.
Is that the thing?
That was the cable news birth era. Like it all started with cable news. I mean, newspapers are
not Clinton, but cable news.
But that era is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, his presidency, if you watch, enough of the sort of the political docs, is like it was this sort of like, shot across the bow to the Republican Party, which at that time very much identified with the South and sort of this sort of type of voter. And here was this like Bubba guy from Arkansas, who sort of, it was this sort of cult of personality that prior all of the scandals was like an incredible political force. Like I remember prior to how much his reputation got crushed as a kid growing up in with him as like, I'm trying to remember, was he so 96 was my first election that I could vote in. I'm doing the math. Anyway, he was like the first politician that I sort of felt like in some ways connected to. And I remember just his speeches were incredible. Like they were notoriously, they ran very long. And I always felt as someone, as like a voting member of the population, I'm like, I felt like he was making me smarter. I actually thought, I was like, wow, this is this cool thing that politicians can do. They can make me understand an issue.
Really? You didn't feel that with Bush, with Junior? No, straight faced.
Junior or his dad?
Junior. When Junior spoke, I legitimately felt smarter than him, so I smelled smarter.
Sorry, okay, I didn't get that.
Gotcha.
I'm too slow for you. But I was saying Clinton was a real threat to the sort of a really big part of America that had really fully matured as this conservative movement that was born in the hippie days, that they hated the hippies and they were sort of becoming like the Karl Rove nerds that got their way into government, to saying like, screw the hippies, we're going to control government from the inside. So Bill Clinton became this like, this sort of like punching bag that then cable news came in and did this thing with media. I mean, the political forces were already doing this, but then media found a money-making business. The Roger Ailes of the world, the Matt Drudges of the world, the Fox Newses of the world found like they were the original influencers, the original trollers that just found engagement farms from just hating on a very big public figure. So that's where the seed of this started, and in some ways, I remember reading books that were coming out at the end of the Clinton presidency that were describing this new phenomenon, that there used to be neighborhoods that, somebody would have a Republican flag on their lawn and it was no big deal. It was just the way people talked about what they did during elections. It didn't mean you're not welcome here, but that was this new effect that towards the end of the Clinton era was like, wait, like people are starting to move away. People are starting to leave these neighborhoods, these districts for congressional candidates aren't just being gerrymandered from a political tactic, they're being ripped open culturally, that people are now separating themselves. So that was the beginning of this sort of, connection between media and politics and this sort of divisive cultural.
Which is ironic to me because Clinton at the time was, and I still think is considered to be one of the best presidents and maybe conservatives would disagree because that's why
conservatives hate him so much, because he
was so good at walking across the aisle and getting the Republicans.
That's why they hated him, and that's why they hated Obama, is because Obama was this effect that, at least at the beginning of his presidency, represented this sort of tent effect. That's why he's so threatening to people that have frankly different purposes with government, I would argue.
But see, everything you've said about the media and all that is also why I kind of get in a tizzy about the whole Facebook caused the election thing, because I think, the media has been a party to causing, I mean, and to be fair, there's so many elements. It's like, Reagan, not taxing the rich as much, which has causes inequality to rise, which causes, the demographics of America to change. And there's also gerrymandering and all this kind of stuff. But, I think in my sense, and there's this visual that I looked at a while ago where it's like how much, I don't know if you guys have seen this. It's like a 2-minute video of how much like Republicans and Democrats vote with each other in Congress and how much that's changed over time. But like
it used to be the thesis for what this thing is for, is that in some ways people, I mean, it's the garbage of a two-party system that everything feels so binary that there seems to be, but I mean, at some point, yeah, like AOC and is it Crenshaw, the Republican guy with the eye patch, like they've joined together on an issue. Like Kristen Gillibrand is partnered up with I think
you mean
Josh.
But
that's what they're supposed to do. That's what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to find issues to push forward and then bring broad consensus with them. And then, yeah, some of these issues we're never going to agree on, and those are the longer term cultural dividers. But the rest of them, there's things that we can find agreements on. That's what government. But that's like I agree with you, Lauren. There's this general perception from left and right that just government itself is unpopular. But that's kind of like a childish point of view, because nobody's walking in saying, well, here's my alternative. They're just saying, I don't like it. It's not fair. But and then it becomes this trust thing, which definitely is a product of the way the media is part of this story. I mean, once upon a time, people just had the newspaper to know what FDR was up to. They didn't have 24-hour wall-to-wall Twitter coverage of everything to just find their.
Can you fix your voice, Fred? Drink some water.
So I think, like, that general kind of like fact that gets thrown in, like, well, the government itself is just this untrustworthy thing. It's sort of like a useless kind of entry. I'm not describing your comment, Lauren. I'm just saying that fact that everybody seems to just, I just don't trust government in general. Well, what are you going to do instead? What's the alternative? At least some people are off trying to build these crypto empires, and they're saying we want to live in some decent. It'll fail too, probably. But I'm just saying they're at least then saying, then what? I'm saying, to me, we live in this era of everybody just sort of like folding their arms saying, I don't like it. Which TV show should I watch instead? Like that's the end of people's civic engagement, versus like it used to be, like, if you don't like it, then go run for Congress and change it from the inside. Or if you don't like it, demonstrate or get involved in local politics and turn your community into the example of what you think should be. Or I'll go start a community, go over there in that empty land in the west of America and say, this is how we should live. But everybody is so like numbed into what's on Netflix next, that like we just sit there and complain and tweet about things and call that engagement, and that's sort of like this sort of the end game here, is that we're just then watching other people who really do have real purposes to consolidate power or to sort of influence stuff that just play that. They just play people's emotional almost exhaustion at some point.
Yeah. In a way, I think a lot of media has become kind of like a TV show that people would rather tune into than learn more about how the government works in general. And I think that lack of education on how it even works is a big part of the lack of trust and the dislike. When it's so much easier and entertaining to tune into something like Fox News, or if we want to go back to the Clinton era, or even Obama, I guess, something like Rush Limbaugh. Have you guys seen that? I think it's a documentary about the woman whose dad was brainwashed by Fox News.
No.
It's basically this
What's it called?
I think
the title is something
like that. Yeah, it's like
I love Lauren showing up and dropping the news cycle on us between the nuclear bomb news and appreciate it.
It's called The Brainwashing of My Dad. And it's all about the right-wing media and how like it kind of turned him into a less reasonable person, and really had this rift between them. And I feel like I kind of saw the same thing happening to my dad under Obama, where it was just like the more Fox News you watched and the more talk radio you listened to, the more they would start to spiral into these things that didn't really make rational sense when you got out of that sphere. and
Wait, what is
looked
it
at
called?
other
What am I looking for? What am
The
I
The
looking for?
Brainwashing of My Dad.
Here, I'll drop it on the chat.
Yeah, 2015 documentary. So he went from a non-political Democrat into a highly political Republican because of the right-wing media. And so she just kind of explores that influence and watching it happen in front of her over a series of years. It's pretty interesting. But I think that's kind of a small snapshot of what has been going on in a lot of this country, creating this sharp divide because of this rhetoric. And it's very entertaining rhetoric. And the more you listen to it, the more you get emotional about it and you want to listen to more. And it's very validating for a lot of people who I think have been let down in many legitimate ways by local or national politics. And yeah.
Great. No, I'll have to check it out.
So where does
Yeah,
messy
This is-
fit
this
into all
is-
this?
Wait, this is before we get to that. This is what I was talking about. This video, it's 1 minute. I don't know if you've seen this, but House Representative over the course of time, connections, basically, the more that pair
More
agreed, the deeper the connection is, the bigger the dot, the more connection, blah blah. And then it just shows the historical record here. So see 1949, and you see all the connections across all of them. So
gotta love info charts.
So this is really interesting because it just gets, you can just see suddenly. So here's 1970s.
The
Now
Southern
we're
Strategy started around the 70s.
And then now look at that, boom, 90s.
Oh God.
And then
That's about
boom,
when Fox News and Talk Radio started.
90s
in the
again,
90s.
2001.
Right.
Boom. So now this is the era that we currently live in. It's since the
Jesus
2000.
Christ.
So you know,
But this
So-
this clearly shows, like, I guess this is where
this is pre-Facebook, people, right? This started to happen. This is when it starts to happen.
the trend started. And again, this is where
Yeah, the
when
trend
you-
starts to
when
happen.
you and I debate about Facebook and how complicit they are or aren't in any of this stuff. I certainly don't claim that Mark Zuckerberg woke up one day and said, how do I divide America and tilt elections more
Right.
effectively? I also don't deny that, at some point we're all staring at a mirror of ourselves. Like even this is a reflection of us. It isn't a bunch of bad guys in Washington dividing America. What the same anger I have pointed towards cable news, where I think they as a business found profit margins in outrage economies and in dividing people into simplistic anti-intellectual positions that are just binary and frankly effective to people that aren't their bosses, but people that are the people running for office. They're often backroom sort of glad handing the people that run these networks. The same sort of anger I have that they just found a business in sort of upending the connective tissue of society, to really overstate all of it. I think social media then found that mixtape that was ripping music illegally, but it didn't bother anybody that much, and found a way to make 10,000 of them, and found a way to sort of exponentially create the effect that media has on populations. And again, I'm not claiming Zuckerberg intentionally did this, but I do think at some point it was clear that that's what his, app where friends would find each other and like each other's vacation pictures. When that was like, hey, dude, this is suddenly being used for something that is much more powerful, for something that I can't imagine.
So this is where
he just kept saying, no, man, this is just free speech.
Well,
bro.
this is where the debate. Well, see, I got to interrupt because this is where the debate actually gets more interesting, because is Facebook email or is Facebook Fox News? Or is Facebook something in between? Because that was the debate even like a decade ago.
They didn't call themselves a publisher. They thought they were just a platform.
Exactly. There was that debate, is like, we're a platform or a publisher. And so that's interesting, right? Because they don't have a perspective necessarily, but the algorithm is adapting. And so that's the whole debate, which is kind of interesting to me.
I just think I guess and sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. The point I'm trying to make that me and Min disagree a lot about is I think about, everybody loves talking about the founders and the Constitution, or, what our country is built on. I think every single person that started a country or even started a business pre the 90s, nobody factored in the way that technology was a character in public life. It was an actual voice with a personality that affects the way we live our lives. And that to me is the new normal. That
you know why? Because because Marshall McLuhan didn't come until the 1970s.
But to me that's sort of the question mark that will continue to live in, and maybe AI pushes the case because now we're treating a technology like it's an entity, not just a platform, and I think that to me is sort of the like I think as a citizen you need to be media literate now. Like that should be like a requirement course to graduate from high school, to sort of at least basically understand how to make your way through the internet. That didn't used to be the case, but I think that's probably a smarter, better population that at least walks into a debate saying, well, I saw this on Fox News, doesn't mean anything when
Well,
I'm
I think
pointing something.
I agree with you, but I think the problem with that is that we are fish inside of an ocean that is technology, and it's like yes, I'm gonna have a physics course and a math course and even a coding course, but I'm not gonna have a social media course because that's the ocean that you know what I mean? It's like
I think media literacy is should be cooked into constitutions now. But I interrupted you, Lauren. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry, Lauren.
I was just going to say I agree with you. I do think of it as an entity these days. The image I typically have in my head is one of a headless monster sort of blundering forward without any actual direction, because I don't think there is direction. Really, the only thing that Facebook and the media like Fox News have in common is the profit motive. And that's what drives them forward. And that's why I see it as this headless monster, because it's not about Mark Zuckerberg saying, I want to be more extremist. It's the fact that allowing those kinds of posts makes him more money. And that's what the algorithms do. And so there is no real master plan here. And that's part of what I find very scary about it, is that it's really just sort of blundering forward like this headless monster, and the only direction is profit, and everything else is sacrificed in the name of profit. And if we expect these kinds of structures to serve us as citizens in terms of making our lives better, increasing well-being, making politics better, making our communities better, we should not expect that from any kind of entity whose sole drive is profit. And it's our own mistake that we try to use these sorts of tools to increase well-being when it's not about that, and it never will be.
Fully agree. And this goes back to a conversation we were having last week, man, is like, what is sort of the 2023 and 24 conversation about public goods for all these efforts in Silicon Valley, and for all these amazing big brains in this era of innovation and all these incredibly impactful technology? How do we put into the value system not just how rich I get, or what's my parachute look like, or which private jet am I on, or which island am I going to? What if a percentage of the pie chart of what me and my company are doing is publicly valuable, in a way that, and that I do think there's a lot of blockchain culture people that I think added that to their ethos. It's just they got screwed by current marketplace. But that is something that I want to find more narratives for. Is like I kind of just default to this, like my own boomer reaction to things. It's just like, well, commerce corrupts. I just have this at the end of the day, everything that, but that can't be totally true. That obviously isn't. That's an ignorant statement on my part. But there must be some good news somewhere.
It isn't just technology, though. I mean, I think technology has really just kind of allowed it to grow. But you can see the same kind of pattern with these sort of mansions, these sort of McMansions that are built with just as many amenities as possible, because they're not meant to be actual homes for people to live in. They're built to be short-term investments. And so they will cram as many different types of features and amenities into these houses as possible, even if it doesn't make sense or it doesn't make living there comfortable. As long as it has that extra bathroom, you're going to make more money reselling it. And I think that kind of drive is what has turned us away from making a home that actually has value and quality, and turning it into a short-term investment, and once again sacrificed in the name of profit. And so I don't think it is just technology. It's just that technology has really heightened and made more clear that drive and the consequences.
I was just thinking about this yesterday as I was sitting at the airport. Is like how, as I understand that, I at some point we should get an economist on here to keep us honest, man. But as I understand it, two major institutions that arguably serve public goods and are also industries, like airline industry and also the healthcare industry, both incredibly impactful in terms of how they reach everybody, for virtually everybody. Both also incredibly frustrating as basically government level bureaucracies, should you ever have a problem with them. Like in terms of just how incredibly messy those internal systems are. And I guess I look at both of them as examples of things that as a category in public life are public goods. Like people should be able to get on planes at a moment's notice to go somewhere else on planet Earth. That obviously is somebody's economic industry, that there needs to be enough gas in the plane and enough people working on that plane to service a safe flight. But the net need for everybody to be able to have that choice in life is something that is effectively subsidized by governments globally. You know, they are loss leader businesses that are subject to gas prices when, you know, if you think about how much it suddenly cost to fly a plane versus 2 years ago. Meanwhile, the healthcare industry, similarly, like it needs to be, those lights need to be on. People go to the emergency room every single day. Also, an incredibly mucked up, you know, bureaucracy. And I look at those as either two things that are super ripe for, you know, some kind of Silicon Valley person to come in and say, here's a blockchain solution or here's an AI solution, because of how mucky the sort of the experience is to ever have an issue with it or how to navigate the inner workings of it. But I guess my long-winded comment is like, on the one hand, I like these as examples of public goods, institutions that at the end, the net reason they exist is because people need them and they should operate smoothly. They're also incredibly terribly run. And is that because they're government subsidized? Like, is that because because they have the clause of you know, policy and lawmakers and you know, a cycle of every 2 years, new people in Washington throwing grenades at their system? Is that because it's ultimately mired in the fact that they're half commercial, half, you know, public goods?
I mean, I would say yes to that. I mean,
it's just like, where's the positive?
I might be more right leaning than you guys, but I like in that sense, you know, like I don't like, I can't hate on commerce because commerce is what enabled a lot of things, right?
Especially in technology.
Massive ecosystem of like, yes, there's bad things happening, and yes, there's like a lot of profiteering, but in the ocean of profiteering, there is like an ocean of good things, like better cameras and better Zoom, you know, and like all this kind of stuff that leads to more progress in certain ways, better medicine, like, and which like definitely governments are, they're not government subsidized industries are not necessarily incentivized towards efficiency or innovation, right? Like Amtrak is awesome and I really value it as an individual, but I simultaneously recognize that it's not that great, like compared to train systems I've seen around the world, which are, you know, maybe are run differently. Like definitely I know that Japan is a bunch of private companies, right? So anyway, yeah, I think it's a tough one. It's a complicated one.
It's just an interesting thing to find the light through, because on the one hand, when things are privatized or nationalized, there's this component of national pride or cultural pride in the way that that's ours, right, that belongs to us. And that's a good thing. That makes people care about it. And the way we were saying that those like service days in Rwanda probably create that sense of community. On the other hand, when something is purely commercially minded, there's sort of, while I think commercial motives might be inherently corrupt, long vision, the blunt honesty of the marketplace is really useful in sort of diagnosing the value of something. Is that like, do people like it? And it's sort of sobering when like, yeah, people, the consumer runs towards Netflix. They love the idea that I can click on whatever I want. And then Netflix will be humbled the day when the consumer runs in another direction. And so that's a valuable thing when we're talking about ideas, is like, there's just the truth of like, do people want this thing? And that's right, what a commercial enterprise is built off of, is servicing that. So it's an interesting thing. I mean, at the one hand, I'm dreaming of a world where we all sort of have a bigger value towards things that are just publicly valuable, not just valuable to some rich people that came up with the idea.
But that's because you're a commie.
On the other hand, the better products and the better things in life are because someone took a risk on something with somebody else's risky pile of money and tried something.
I don't see why we have to pick one or the other here.
I'm not, and I'm sorry, I'm not suggesting what it is. I'm just trying to think about where's the clarity to picking the next good thing.
One of the things that I find frustrating when I see a lot of Americans talk about healthcare is that they seem to think that it can only be public or private and commercialized. And most other countries do both. And so I think that really what we're missing is just having a sort of public net to catch the people that can't, for other reasons, afford or have access to a more private sort of system, a more profit seeking system. But with education, we do that really just fine. I'm not going to say that public schools are in a good place, but I'm glad that they're there, because if schools were only private or some sort of mixture, I think a lot less people would just be educated. And I think that shows in the way that healthcare was before Obamacare, where so many people just went uninsured. And in terms of these two pillars, I mean, I think that health and education are probably two of the biggest pillars of any society. And so if there's anything you're going to want to invest in to make sure that everybody is healthy and educated, it would be those two. That's what a government should invest in. And so I don't think it necessarily has to be all public. I think having private options of education are good for people who want to pay and can afford to send their kids to private schools. And that can be where a lot of innovation happens too, that can influence and affect the way public education is run in a good way. But public education should still be there and should still be free, and also I think mandatory. And I would have that same mentality for public health care. It should still be there. Even if you have private options, you can still have private healthcare, private insurance, as most people in most other countries do. And but I think having that net of a public system is also just as valuable. So I guess like you can have a private area of these two things that does do that innovation without having to sacrifice the public net to make sure everybody still has access to it.
I mean,
I
don't think
I have to go in like 4 minutes.
I don't think this is accomplished without Barbie making a sequel film that features left-wing politics explicitly. That's
But I think, look, my sort of like end statement there is that like I love everything you just said, and I think that's kind of why the U.S. is not a fully capitalist country, nor is it a socialist country. It's kind of always been this sort of like tug between having a national army and having a postal service and having public law enforcement, fire departments. There's all kinds of things that we take for granted that the government does fund. And also one that ideologically prizes innovation and entrepreneurship.
There's a big caveat to that though, Fred, which is that we are arguably the most privatized country in the world. Right.
Okay, but we're also not fully foreign to socialized.
No, we're not fully socialized at all. But what I'm saying is that there's no industry in America that is not touched by private interests and commercial interests, which is interesting. Which is unique. It was unique.
Right. I'm almost making the counterpoint is that like that's almost the assumption that we're that kind of country. I'm almost saying that like actually don't overlook how much of the things that we value in America are part of the government with the treasury. So I guess in some ways, if we're able to value the system that we're either all voting in or against, or filling out polls that tell us that we trust the government less than even the individual politicians, it's like, well, no, then what system would you replace this with that's trying to, interact with this diverse of a population, with this diverse of a set of issues? Which doesn't mean love it or leave it. It just means like, can you factor your rhetoric to say like, this is still, a pretty decent model for this puzzle versus like how much everybody loves to burn everything down when they vote for certain candidates. Right. But look, it's interesting. I mean, I think what we keep rallying on these conversations, man, is that there's this amazing time for cultural change and political forces, but at the center of that seems to be these two characters of media and technology that have added dynamics to all of it that I don't think most politicians either understand beyond how it benefits their campaigns, or I think hasn't yet been fully factored into what is the better world on the other side of all this change.
Right. Well, I think on that note, thanks everybody.
That's a good note to end on. I like that.
Well, thanks everybody. We'll see you next time.